Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good evening, everyone. It is Friday, April the 16th, 2021. It is currently 5:11 p.m. Central Time, and I'm back here at Victory Baptist Church, located in Ovalo, Texas. I'm back here in the sanctuary. I'm back here in front of the microphone, behind the microphone. I don't know if there's an agreement, behind or in front. I'm in front of the microphone, speaking into the microphone. And I know I'm not typically here on a Friday evening, but I needed to come back. I needed to come back this evening to try to clarify some things, to try to fix some things, and try to, get a number of other live broadcasts done that I was not able to get done this morning. So if you're able to listen to me live this evening, well, good evening. Welcome. As always, the Spreaker app, the chat is open and available. Just go to the Spreaker app, hit the little chat icon. You can ask a question. You can say hello. You can offer your thoughts, opinions, whatever the case may be. Feel free to do that. I got an email today in regards to our series on the Sermon on the Mount that was not only encouraging because they really seemed to like it, but then they gave me a link to another sermon from a Sermon on the Mount, and a sermon about the Sermon on the Mount, a sermon from part of the text of the Sermon on the Mount, however I'm supposed to say that. So I greatly appreciate that. I'm looking forward to listen to that. We may get to that this evening. There's just a lot of things to do, but what we have to do first is of the utmost importance, because the last thing I did this morning, I think it was after 12 o'clock when we finally finished it. I was doing a very important live broadcast about the recent police shootings and the narratives we create. And in that broadcast, probably the most important, the most dramatic part of that live broadcast was supposed to be a tweet from Dr. James White from Alpha and Omega Ministries, Apologia Church. That tweet was supposed to be kind of the dramatic part of that live broadcast. And something went wrong. When the live broadcast was over, I looked at my Spreaker app because I always go back and listen to verify everything worked. And it had broken my live broadcast into two broadcasts. And guess where the break occurred? Right when I was reading the tweet, right in the middle of reading the tweet. Now, I believe if you continue to listen to that, you can kind of get an idea of what the tweet said. I think I break it down. So I don't think you really missed too much, but it really bothered me because, that was a dramatic part, because here is someone who's well-respected in the Christian apologetic world, someone who's had a major influence in my Christian life, and his tweet demonstrated from my perspective exactly what I was trying to say, that whenever these police shootings happen, people create these narratives, and then everyone just speaks from the position of the narrative, and truth gets obscured. Nobody cares about truth, and everybody wants to just win the debate with the other narratives. And I cannot stand that Christians fall into that, because the only narrative we should care about is the pursuit of truth. And we should look at these situations carefully. We should be slow to speak. We should be quick to listen. We should be slow to anger. We should not give an answer until we've heard everything about the situation. And we should make sure that we are being honest, that we are being careful, that we're using biblical wisdom. And if you go back and listen to everything we discussed this morning, I talked about all of that. So what I want to do is just try to clarify a little bit of what I tried to do earlier this afternoon. It got kind of messed up because I want everyone to hear this tweet. I want to read this tweet to you carefully. I'm going to take it apart just a little bit because I think I did an okay job taking it apart earlier. But I just want to make sure that there is no confusion and there's clarification here. So let me just start by once again saying, if you've been watching the news, there have been a number of shootings involving police officers, right? and that people have died in regards to these shootings. Or there have been shootings that have happened maybe back in March where video is being released, say, yesterday afternoon, yesterday evening. This is creating a lot of protest, a lot of anger, a lot of animosity. People are upset. A lot of people are upset with the police, upset with the whole judicial system. They're mad. They're angry. There's concerns of what kind of violence could occur, if stores are going to be broken into, things are going to be burned. There's a lot of concern about how all of this is going to play out. And in the middle of all of this, as usual, as soon as a shooting occurs, the narratives get pushed to the forefront, and then everyone just starts talking from that perspective. And rarely are people there. Wait, time out. Let's just think about this logically, biblically, carefully, and even Christians fall into this trap. And as I mentioned this morning, you really have two ways of going. You have the really pro-police narrative, who immediately tries to justify the actions of the police, or they try to take the focus off the police by pointing at some other bad behavior. It's all about the police. Now, in some cases, maybe the police are in the right. Maybe some cases the police are in the wrong. But I'm just saying this is a narrative that emerges. It's very pro-police, justify the police, and condemn whoever was shot even if they don't come out and say they deserved it. They almost try to say at least it was. They try to justify it in some way, shape, or form. On the other side, you have the very anti-police narrative, right? And they want to focus on the wrong of the police and not any of the responsibility possibly or any wrong done by the person who was shot. And nobody really wants to listen to the other side. Nobody wants to really consider every aspect of the situation, because there's always multiple layers, and everybody wants to just throw that out and fight and argue. And people seem in some cases more concerned about winning a debate than they are the fact that a human being created in the image of God was killed. And that always bothers me greatly. So I really try to challenge everyone to throw out the narratives, focus on truth, listen to both sides, try to understand the other perspective, and realize that in some of these situations, and I'm not mentioning any specific shootings, if you notice what I'm doing, because if I mention a specific shooting, and if I don't say everything, if I don't give every perspective, people are going to say, hey, you're doing the same thing. So I'm trying to be very careful not to mention a specific shooting at this time. What I want you to realize is that you have to be very careful, and you've got to listen to every perspective. You've got to listen to every perspective. You've got to try to understand it. And you just have to realize that as a Christian, what you should care most about, in my estimation, you should throw out all of the narratives and say all you care about is truth. You care about that justice is done. You care about what's right. And that's what's important to you. And you got to throw aside your personal feelings. You got to throw aside your personal politics. You got to throw out all of that because you are a Christian. Your perspective is to be from Scripture. And again, you cannot, obviously, no matter what the tragedy is, you have to remember that a human being or human beings were killed, and they were created in the image of God, and they entered into eternity. And we always have to maintain that very important perspective. But in the midst of all of this back and forth, in the midst of all of this controversy and debates in regards to police shootings recently, an interesting narrative began to form. Now, this narrative has been put forth by Tucker Carlson on Fox News. His perspective has also been replayed on InfoWars by Alex Jones. I think if you listen to yesterday's episode of InfoWars by Alex Jones, they start their broadcast by playing Tucker Carlson putting forth this idea. And now it's been picked up by Dr. James White of Alpha and Omega Ministries. Now, right there, Alex Jones saying it, that's one thing. Not a Christian minister, yeah, we can get into what he does with Christianity, but yeah, he's separate from Christianity. Tucker Carlson, Fox News, that's not Christianity. That's not a minister. That's not an elder. But Dr. James White, that's an elder. That's a minister. That's someone who's in charge of a ministry. Now, that's got to be viewed from a biblical perspective. So why is he on Twitter putting forth a narrative that is really emerged from these other sources? Now, is the narrative true? Is the narrative accurate? Is it misleading? Is it deceiving? What was said? So here we go. I want you to listen carefully to this. Let me pull this up, because it's very important to me that you hear this without any interruptions or the audio going crazy. All right, here we go. This is from Dr. James White. This was published on April the 14th, 2021 at 9:44 p.m. Central Time. Here it is. Or I don't know if it was posted at Central Time. I'm sorry, 9:44 p.m. He's in Arizona, so I don't know what time zone that is. Central Time for me. All right, here we go. So April the 14th, 2021 at 9:44 p.m. Here we go. Now this is going to deal with two tragedies. One of the police shootings and the shooting of the individual in the Capitol riots that took place. All right, here we go. We know the identity of the female cop who shot the fleeing, resisting black man, mistakenly thinking she was firing her taser. You'll probably never know the identity of the cop who killed Air Force veteran Ashley Babbitt purposefully with a gun. Get used to the double standards. Get used to the double standards. Now, let me read that one more time. We know the identity of the female cop who shot the fleeing, resisting black man, mistakenly thinking she was firing her taser. We will probably never know the identity of the cop who killed Air Force veteran Ashley Babbitt purposefully with a gun. Get used to the double standards. Now, as soon as I read that, I was like, oh boy, okay, wait a minute. Number one, this is the whole Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones thing, all right? Number two, just look at what is being done in the text, and it should bother every Christian. Now, clearly, reading the comments underneath it, the people replying to that tweet, a lot of them agree with it and seem to think that it's okay. A lot of people were like, wait, what are you doing? What's going on? This is so messed up. So let's just work our way through it quickly, all right? First, note how he deals with the black man who was shot. Please note how he handles this. We know the identity of the female cop who shot now please note, look at the descriptive terms, fleeing, resisting black man. So he first identifies the actions that occurred before the man was shot, fleeing and resisting. He identifies the race of the man. He was black, and he doesn't bother to give us his name. So when it comes to the black man that was shot, we get told what he was doing before he was shot, fleeing and resisting. We are told his race, he's black, and we're not given his name. So almost in a sense, he's kind of being dehumanized. He's just a fleeing, resisting black man who just happened to be shot. And he was shot by mistake. It was an accident. Now, once we move over to the person who was shot during the Capitol riots, please note a very different approach is taken. We'll probably never know the identity of the cop who killed Air Force veteran. Now this person's given a descriptive title, right? Now, we're not told anything about what this person was doing prior to being shot. We were just told this person is an Air Force veteran. See, the black man, he's just a black man who was fleeing and resisting. But this woman who was shot, hey, she was an Air Force veteran. I mean, an Air Force veteran. That's got to mean something, right? Well, as someone who's an Air Force veteran, a disabled Air Force veteran, there are Air Force veterans who do good things, and there are Air Force veterans who do bad things, because guess what? We're all sinners. But hey, an Air Force veteran. So now, almost humanizing this one that was shot. Air Force veteran Ashley Babbitt. Oh, we are even given her name. We are given her identity as an Air Force veteran, and we are literally given her name. So to humanize her, guess what we're not told? We're not told her race. We're not told her race. So the black man is just a nameless black man who was fleeing and resisting, but the woman, Ashley Babbitt, she was an Air Force veteran. And as I stated, she was stationed here at the Air Force Base I worked at for a very long time. And I didn't know her, but we had interactions because, well, I worked in the medical world. So at some point she came into the hospital and I had to help her with something. I don't remember. And even if I did, I couldn't tell you. But so the point is, at least had interaction with the person at some point. Not saying we were friends or anything like that. I'm saying I had interaction with the person. Because as soon as I saw the name, I'm like, wait, that person was stationed here at Dias. And the next thing you know, yes, on our local news, former, Dias airman was shot and killed in the Capitol riots. Now, please note, that's left out. So let me try to remove this. Let's remove Air Force veteran. And let's remove her name. All right. So we knew the identity of the female cop who shot the fleeing, resisting black man, mistakenly thinking she was firing her taser. We will probably know the identity of the cop who killed the white woman who broke through barriers and was trying to get inside a room that was barricaded during the Capitol riots, who was purposely shot with a gun. See, one, it was just a mistake. The guy who was shot, it was just a mistake. I mean, sad it was a mistake, but I mean, it's just a fleeing, resisting black man. I mean, we're sad it was a mistake, but it was just a mistake. Anyway, he was fleeing and resisting and was black. Now, this woman, I mean, she was just an Air Force veteran that was shot. He doesn't even describe what this woman was doing prior to being shot. She broke through barriers and entered into the Capitol during a riot and then tried to get into a barricaded room. But let's leave all of that out. Now, for the black man, we've got to make sure everyone knows he was fleeing and resisting. We got to make sure everyone knows the black man was fleeing and resisting. But the white woman, I mean, she's an Air Force veteran. I mean, let's not put that in any context of how she was shot. One was shot by mistake. The other one was on purpose. One, we immediately found out the name of the female cop, but we may never know the identity of the cop who killed the Air Force veteran. Well, let's go through this. The African-American man who was shot and killed, let's remind ourselves. Oh, he was shot by a police officer who was assigned to a city police force. The woman who broke into the Capitol was killed by Capitol Police. Now, I could be wrong about this, but in many cities, there are rules that if a police officer is involved in a shooting, the name of that police officer must be released to the public, I think, within 5 days in some cities. The Capitol Police, I do not think, operate under any such rule or any such law, that if they shoot someone, the identity of the officer does not have to be released. So maybe this is not some sinister plot and that's they're out to make everyone look bad. Maybe this is just two different police forces operating under two different rules. Is that a possibility, Dr. James White? I mean, you're the great apologist who debates people, so I know you're all concerned about facts and evidence and correctly representing a situation, not to simply carry a narrative. Now, again, I don't care what Tucker Carlson does. I don't care what Alex Jones does, but I care what Christians do in the name of Jesus Christ. The whole tweet there is so just messed up. The black man is dehumanized. It's just a fleeing, resisting black man. And the woman, we get her name and she's an Air Force veteran. And we leave out that she had broken into the Capitol and was trying to get into a barricaded room. We leave that completely out because that has nothing to do with it, right? No, see, you go with a narrative, not truth, not trying to be fair, not trying to be just, not trying to be right. Both individuals need to be treated as individuals who are created in the image of God. This needs to be handled in a correct way. Now, I'll read some of the comments underneath this, all right? One individual states this: have you stopped the gospel apologetics? Or is this just you trying out a different type of apologist stance? I'll keep checking in to refollow when we get more of what the Apologia team does best. And the reason someone's asking that question is I've said, I think anyone who's been following Dr. James White, there's been a major change. I mean, there's no way. It's not the Dr. James White who attended was an elder in the Phoenix Reformed Baptist Church. It's not the same Dr. James White, which is perfectly. He can change, but he's become far more political, at times almost conspiratorial. At times I joke that he's become the Alex Jones of Christian apologetics. Now I know that that's a little hyperbole. That's not an accurate description, but it's like, what has happened? Now that's fine. If that's what he wants to do, great. But when you have already enough division and confusion and pain because a human being was killed by the police, supposedly by an accident, by grabbing the taser and not the gun, maybe don't just somehow try to then add more fuel to the fire by trying to claim that there's some conspiracy that we know the name of the police officer there. But the police officer who shot the, Air Force veteran who just happened to be walking by the Capitol one day and accidentally got shot while she was on the sidewalk. You're misrepresenting and you're trying to create a narrative that's not consistent with the facts. You're leaving out the facts to create a false impression. That's not right. That's not biblical. So Dr. White responded, so I do hours of teaching each week, but this somehow means I have to be silent on the blatant injustice being enshrined by the enemies of the cross. Explain this to me. Now, wait a minute. Who are the enemies of the cross and the blatant injustice? So the person who shot Ashley Babbitt, they are enemies of the cross, and it was not a just shooting. It was an injustice. So it was wrong for them to possibly shoot anyone breaking into the Capitol building, trying to get into a barricaded room, trying to protect senators and even the vice president. Right? Like, what do you? That's some pretty strong language. All right. So one person responded, enemies of white cops who murder equals enemies of the cross. So in other words, if you're an enemy of a white cop, you are an enemy of the cross. Again, I don't even understand what Dr. James White's trying to say. Who's the enemy of the cross? We had two horrible shootings. One involves a man who was resisting and fleeing, and a cop pulled possibly, at least according to her, a gun, or at least according to the police captain, a taser, and it ended up being a gun, and the person was killed. Over here, you have an individual, for whatever reason, felt the need to break into the Capitol, pass through barriers, and was trying to get into a barricaded room, and it ended up shot. Both cases, two human beings who are creating the image of God are dead. Both situations are horrible and tragic. Who's the enemy of the cross? The people who were doing wrong, or the officer of who? I don't know. I don't know. Okay. So they go on, and there's a bunch of back and forth and a bunch of back and forth. And then someone replied with this: brother, we're going to disagree here. As a cop, she should have known the difference. She should know the difference. Accident probable, going to jail for the mistake. Yes. In other words, whether it was is the accident probable? Yes, it's possible she made a mistake, but she's going to go to jail for that mistake, most likely. Other folk have gone to jail for accidental discharges of a weapon, so there's a good chance that cop is going to go to jail. For the Capitol shooting justified? Yes, the video of it attests. Right is right and wrong is, and the idea is wrong. I think they have another reply here. Let me look here. Okay. Yeah. So then other people jump in with other things that are not very helpful. And then another person typed this: yeah, James, I mean, if a mob of possibly armed rioters who likely have military training are trying to break my door down, I'd just ask her for her number and invite her out for a coffee. But hey, that's just me. What do you do? And again, what's this tweet supposed to accomplish? Is it supposed to bring understanding to the situation? Is it supposedly try to destroy the false narratives and create truth? Or is it just going with what he saw on Fox News? This person writes, it's disappointing to see you trumpeting political talking points instead of gospel truth. Ashley Babbitt was a part of a group breaking through the window on a barricaded door in a government building. There's no real comparison. One cop did their job honorably. The other did not. And then you can go on. Of course, everyone's arguing. So all it did is, in other words, he didn't lead anyone to any understanding or any truth. It just created a Twitter thread where everyone can argue and fight and back and forth, adding more noise and everyone going with their narrative. And guess what? No light, no truth, no one closer to anything, no trying to bring people to a calm understanding. No, just inflames the situation. It's not helpful. Why would you create a tweet that completely misleads the situation? Yes, the African-American man who was shot by the police officer who thought she was grabbing her taser and ended up grabbing a gun. Okay, if we go with that idea that it was a mistake, it was a mistake. But it still doesn't mean she's not liable and not going to face legal charges. Doesn't mean that. It was horrible and it was tragic. Okay, and you would hope that she would not make such a mistake when you're dealing with the life of a human being. All right. Now, the human being in that situation was, as far as we understand, was being arrested for a warrant. Yes, and it looks like he was attempting to flee and resist. All of that appears to be true. There are plenty who would say, wait a minute, they already had the person's license. I think they already had the license plates. They already had the name. So where was the person going to go? Even if he fled, they could have just followed him and arrested him later. Others say, well, that's not the way it should be done. I understand that. Everyone has their thoughts and opinions on it. The bottom line is, let's say that what he did was wrong. Was it still grounds to be killed? You could, I think he's resisting and fleeing. I think you could say, well, I'm not going to get into what everyone's going to say because everyone's going to have a different opinion. The point is, let's say he was wrong in the resisting and fleeing. I don't believe he should be killed at that point. He wasn't presenting any harm to the police officer, but we'll allow all of the evidence to come out, and everyone will have their thoughts and opinions on that, and everyone will just argue. I'm trying to be careful not to get into all of those arguments. I'm trying to argue this. If we say he was resisting and fleeing, therefore somehow justify the shooting, well, then if you turn to Ashley Babbitt, who had broken into the Capitol, part of a riot, trying to get into a barricaded room or through a barricaded door or through a barricaded window, whatever the situation is, I don't have all the information right here in front of me. Well, then wouldn't there be some justification for that shooting? In other words, if you're going to point to that one was what? Good, bad, and that one wasn't? The whole tweet is just so, the way it treats the one versus the other, the one dehumanizes, the other one gets a name, gets completely all of the stuff being done prior to the shooting left out. It's just so not the way Christians are to conduct themselves. And even godly people who are knowledgeable in the scriptures, who participate in very important debates with people of other religions and faiths and perspective, who has been very good in those debates, someone who knows Greek and Hebrew far better than I ever will, someone who can read Greek and Hebrew, probably can write Greek and Hebrew, can read manuscripts, someone who's so knowledgeable, who has done so much, can find themselves just as prone to this narrative way of thinking as anyone else. And that is sad. Now, I wish Dr. James White would get rid of the politics and abandon that and get back to exegeting Scripture, teaching Scripture, and moving the gospel forward. Now, he would say he still does that day after day with his hours of teaching. I understand that. That's great. I just think there's a little bit of the political hijacking present. But that's my own personal opinion. It ultimately doesn't matter. Whether he's political, not political, the point is that tweet, there's nothing good about that. That's horrible. But it's an example of all of us prone to this narrative thinking. Because we get so much of our thinking sometimes not from stopping, and I talked about it this morning, if you go back and listen to this morning, that what we have to do when we're trying to process this information, in a sense, we have to just get we got to step step away from the world. And what I kind of use this imagery of stepping inside the church. And when I say the church, not churchianity with people, church as representing God, the scriptures, meditating, thinking, and just allowing our Christian worldview to help us process what we're seeing in the news from a biblical perspective, not a political one, not even a churchianity one, not even a Christian one as far as what other Christians say. We just God, the scriptures, and thinking through it carefully. We have to do that, but we are so influenced by all of this other nonsense that we watch and listen to, and it sounds good. It sounds good. I mean, obviously, everyone loved what Tucker Carlson had to say. Everyone loved it because everyone is picking up the idea. And I don't know if he was the first to promote the idea, but it's been picked up by a lot of people. And you're like, well, wait, what are you trying to say? Well, what are you doing with this? And it's problematic. But I wanted to at least clarify that as much as I possibly could. There's so much more I could say about it. The whole thing just makes me sick. Watching these videos of these people dying, it's horrific. And I know there's so many layers to the thing. Well, they could have done this. They could have done that. I understand all of that. But the person still died. And you want justice to be done. And you want what's right to be right. Look, sometimes the cop is right. Sometimes we have to admit the cop is wrong. Sometimes the person shot was actually in the right and is the victim. Sometimes the person shot was actually doing something wrong, and it's a clean, legal shooting. And there's every situation is different. Every situation has to be looked at. And in many of the cases, as I said earlier today, I'll state it again here, some of these shootings, I don't know how much race, everyone wants to make it a racial issue. I don't know how much race had to do with the person making a decision, and they're just in the midst of the situation made a decision, and whether it was, and in many cases, it could be a very bad decision because of poor training or whatever you want to blame it on, but it may literally have nothing to do with the race of anybody. But everyone wants to make it about race. They want to make that narrative. They want to make it the narrative. It's about race. It may have nothing to do with it. Maybe, hey, I'm in this situation. Here's what's going on. And in a split second, they made the decision and they make the wrong one. The only difference is when a police officer makes the wrong decision in that split second, it can have life and death consequences. That makes that job very difficult. Very difficult. And we have to understand that. But at the same time, we don't excuse when wrong is done. In some cases, it's just horrible, horrible actions. Again, depending on which shooting you're looking at. Each shooting has to be looked at carefully, truthfully, honestly, gathering all the facts before any major judgment is made. And again, if it can be demonstrated that it's racial, then, I mean, whatever the facts are, that's the point. Whatever the facts say, that's what you go with. Because you don't have a side in it other than the side of truth and justice. And you should be heartbroken that people died, and it should bother you greatly. All right, there we go. I wanted to clarify that. Hopefully that worked. Hopefully that offered some clarification. And, if you have any questions, you can email me at newsif@yahoo.com. newsif@yahoo.com. All right. Thanks for listening. I should be back on the air here in a few minutes. God bless.